Hey, Howard here from 82 Maple. And by way of context, as we're talking about the little Woodmizer sharpener today, I purchased a Norwood HD 36 mil in 2019, and along with that, the Norwood Pro sharpener. I was a complete neophyte. Up until that time, I had never sharpened anything other than a chainsaw blade, and probably that only did a mediocre job. But I found myself in the sharpening business. Gotta tell you, Norwood made that process super simple with its little Pro sharpener. So I'm gonna use that as a bit of a benchmark today for comparison with the Woodmizer BMST something like that 50. It's here. Yep, I got it right. BMST 50. Hey, it doesn't get any better than that. Now, the Woodmizer BMST 50 costs about twice as much as the Norwood Pro. It takes multiples of time more for the initial setup. And so, roll down to the summary. The outcome and my first impressions on this unit may just surprise you. Let's roll. This is going to be a bit of real time. Then I'm going to have my videographer speed it up a bit and we'll finish strong. Well, there you have it. So it works. And you know what? Just before I got this set up, I viewed another video by a Woodmizer user of this BMST 50. And he said, man, I procrastinate doing blades and I rack them up and then I find that I can only do 3 or 4 at a time. Like I find it exhausting. And I thought, inner voice, what's his problem? Like, sharpening blades is not that big a deal. And then I got my BMST 50. Hey, the setup, I'm very much used to. The Norwood, where I could see what the stone was doing on the tooth at any given time. And I don't know, maybe it's me that I take a lot of comfort from something like that. But this is a little bit more challenging, and I'll talk about it a little more, but I'll just shine a light in here. In order to get this set up right, you can see the stone back in there, and I've got to take this flashlight, look at it, get down here in this pretty awkward position, and take a look around and make my adjustments over here. And it's much more time consuming. Maybe I just haven't gotten the hang of it, but it's 2 to 3 times more time consuming than I ever had with the Norwood Pro, even in the early days. But hey, before we get into the specifics, I just want to share a couple of things about my process. So 4 things when I'm dealing with saws. Number 1, I only have 3 or 4 blades being used at a time, and I'll explain why. I number the blades with a paint pen, and you can see right here, number 1 just rolled around. That'll come off if it's an ordinary marker. I use a paint pen to mark this and to mark where the weld is. And if I'm not starting at the weld, typically I start sharpening right at the weld. I'll mark that spot. If there was some reason that I accidentally got started somewhere else, I'll quickly remember and mark where I started. It just makes it super easy to track. Number 3, I keep a little log book here for all the blades. And so I have Woodmizer. This is the first blade. And the first use of it was on November 20th. And it was on the sawmill on the 21st. And I've sharpened it once. It's now in its second sharpening. So I document all of that so I can actually see. I'm not relying on memory as to how many uses I got out of a blade, and I'll, at the end of each blade cycle use, I'll make a little notation as to what went wrong. It broke on the weld, it broke mid-use while in a cut, it broke while idling, and I've had that happen a couple of times, or I just disposed of it because I felt that it had reached the end of its life. Number 4, as a guide for using blades, so all in shipping and everything, my blades cost me about $30 each Canadian. So I kind of break that down. Now on the first use, a brand new blade, I keep track of my cut times, and I get about 75 minutes of actual cut time. Now that doesn't mean time in the cut, but that's from when I fire up the sawmill and engage the blade in cutting a log, then I'm turning it, etc. But the blade is spinning, it's constantly being used, and if for some reason I forget, rarely, but it does happen, and get distracted by a phone call and leave the sawmill idling for 10 minutes, I count that as cut time. Here's the deal. That weld will only go around those band wheels so many times before it breaks. So time around the wheels is really what I'm counting, aside from maybe the warm-up time. Sometimes that gets factored in, sometimes it didn't. Now back to the little scale. 75 minutes for a brand new blade, 60 minutes of cut time on after the first sharpening and after the second sharpening. After the third, fourth, and fifth sharpenings, about 45 to 50 minutes of use each. Add that up and you've got about 6 hours of cut time. At that point, I take the blade and dispose of it. It's going to break sooner rather than later, and when it breaks in the middle of a cut, it's a bit of a challenge by the time, at least time-wise, by the time you extract that blade, get the sawmill repositioned, get the new blade out, put it on. And some of those times when it gets caught mid-cut, particularly on a big log, can be a bit troublesome, where you have to actually wedge the log open to extract that blade out. So that's the process, and properly tensioned again. I haven't had any problem getting 6 hours of use out of it. And I need to add in here that primarily I'm cutting pine, spruce, and Douglas fir. So your experience might be a little different with that. Now, I also use ideally 3 blades in rotation, meaning I'll start out with 3 new blades, use blade number 1. When it's reached the end of that cycle, 75 minutes of cut time, I rack it up here. And then I use blade number 2, do the same thing, blade number 3, and do the same thing. What that means is my sharpener setup and the amount of push extension that I set in here should be pretty consistent for each of those blades, meaning I'm not going from a blade that I've sharpened 5 times to sharpening a blade that's been used only once, which would be a fairly significant adjustment. I can pretty much guarantee that I can go from and take 3 blades that haven't been sharpened before, set my adjustment for the first blade, go through all 3, do the same after they've all been sharpened once and used twice, etc., through the cycle. It just cuts down the amount of time that is required in the setup. And by the way, historically with the Norwood Pro sharpener, when the third blade needed sharpening, it took me no more than 20 minutes to take that blade off the mill, sharpen it, sharpen its 2 buddies that I had racked up here, and set them aside again and put the blade back into use on the mill. 20 minutes front to back, and I would typically be enjoying half a sandwich or a coffee while I was doing that. That is not my experience with this machine. far more time is involved in it, so I can see why the YouTuber that I was watching dreaded blade sharpening that much and felt a level of exhaustion and frustration after sharpening only 3 to 4 blades. Hey, we got to put the fun back into blade sharpening. It shouldn't be the worst chore involved with sawmilling. So let's talk about now 5 things that I am not keen on with my Woodmizer BMST 50. And you might disagree. In fact, I welcome if you disagree and put your reasons and your compelling logic in the comments section below. Okay, number 1, the initial setup is time consuming. By contrast, the Norwood Pro took me maybe 15 minutes to set up front to back. For this one, I pressed an old router table into use, got a sheet of plywood, 3x6, prepared it. In fact, Norwood recommends a 4x8 foot sheet of plywood, and mounted all of these guides, mounted the sharpener itself, drilled a hole for the drain tube, drilled a hole for the intake tube. Yes, we're involving some grinding solution here. And so none of that had anything to do with orienting myself with the sharpener. And so I don't know what it took me, 2-3 hours versus 15 minutes. Number 2, the Woodmizer space requirements. I just said this is a 3x6 piece of plywood. I started out with something bigger, and I've got a crowded little workshop here at 82 Maple. Yes, a bigger workshop will be coming. That's a bigger project for another year, and we're pretty crowded in here, and every square foot counts. Today, we've got fresh snow and more coming, and so we've had to move some outdoor projects indoors. So space is always at a premium. That little Norwood Pro, I could literally fold it up. I used to hang it right beside my drill press. There's a screw in there somewhere that I would hang it on to balance it. And no, it didn't have the tooth setter, and I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But it was quick and easy. I could clear it right out of the way. It's not portable. By nature of what I just described about the Norwood Pro, you could fold it up and take it anywhere. All you needed to accompany it was a 12-volt battery. So if you're working at various job sites or prefer to sharpen the blades closer to the sawmill, my little garage here is about 150 feet from the sawmill. Hey, that was easy. You just take the 12-volt battery and the sharpener, set it up anywhere, and go to town. This, no. Portability is not a possibility. Number 4, I can't actually see how the grinder, or in fact, the advancing mechanism, is connecting with the teeth. And so this could actually be going sideways on me. It shouldn't if I've tightened it up properly. But from the sharpening position that you just seen me at on the other side, I don't have a clear view. And if I hear something kind of not sounding exactly right, I can't see exactly what that is. Instead, I'm here on my little stool, and so I've got to actually go like this, grab my flashlight, go under here, and see if I can see, yeah, I have a very narrow window in here, how that's contacting the tooth. If you're a more experienced saw filer, that may not be an issue for you. For this neophyte, it is an issue. I like to see how that stone is contacting the tooth each and every time. I pick up all sorts of little clues as to what's going on with that saw, in my own mind at least. And number 5, I don't like all of the solvents here. I have enough solvents in my life, and there's a pretty distinct warning on that can, and I'm throwing a photo in here, but you have to handle that with care. It needs to be stored properly. At the end of its life, it needs to be disposed of properly. I have no choice around handling it. So it comes in from the source bucket, comes in, we use it here in the process. Presumably it cools the cutting wheel and makes the cut easier on the teeth. but it has to drain out through a hole back in here. And so this magnet has to be placed. The previous owner lost 2 of the magnets, so I'm now on a hunt for a couple more magnets. I had 2 out of the 4 that are apparently come with this machine. So one's here, it's there to trap metal filings. And if I pull this out, which I don't feel like doing without my rubber gloves, I keep my rubber gloves right over there, but it's got a full head of hair of metal filings. I keep the other magnet down in my disposal bucket here, and you can't see it through the opaque material, but it will be bristling as well. So this pipe is my disposal pipe. It comes down here. This bucket's going to fill up. Then I take that bucket and dump it back into the source bucket. So I have to handle this stuff. And I've got to remove a lid, got to get a funnel, pour it back in there, and then remove the magnet, all the time wearing rubber gloves, scrape all those metal filings off and put it back. Why? You know, my point being, all of this, and I'm going to jump into a little bit about the tooth setter here as well. I know that there are hobbyist sawmillers that use the tooth setter religiously. Again, I cut fir, pine, and spruce primarily. And I never used a tooth setter in the first 6 hours of cutting on any blade. I'm not saying that using the tooth setter wouldn't have extended the blade life for another 3 hours, but let's do the math on this. I pay $30 a blade, all in, taxes, shipping, the whole works. I get 6 hours out of it. I break it down to $5 an hour. Let's say I extend the blade life by another 3 hours, another 50% with no danger of breakage or anything else, but I extended the usefulness of it by using my tooth adjuster. And the tooth adjuster is in here, and I had one with the Norwood as well. My experience was it didn't extend the life significantly. But let's give this the benefit of the doubt, and we're extending it by 50% out to 9 hours. Wow. After all that was involved with setting the teeth, getting it right, and that's a little bit of a process on itself, not onerous, but it's time consuming. I've now brought my blade costs down to $3.33. I've got my math pretty close on that. So, per hour, whoa, it's not worth it to me. Just sharpen the blade, use it 6 times, and get rid of it. I don't need to move my hourly costs from $5 down to $3.30 an hour. And I just find that to be a lot of extra trouble, and to not have the option on this particular machine of not having the tooth setter, which I think adds some expense. Hey, maybe it's a big deal to you, maybe it's not. Again, feel welcome to disagree. I'm a learner, so I'm gonna learn from your comments as you post them down below. What have I missed here? Let me just go back to my notes for a minute. Okay, so let's get back to what our choices are as hobbyist sawmillers. Number one, we can use a sharpening service and rack up 20, 30, 40 blades. You have your capital cost involved in doing that. Then you have to bundle them up and take them off to a sharpening service with mixed results, I might add. It seems that the field of hobbyist sawmillers is divided 50-50 between those that have found a good sharpening service, an economical sharpening service, and those that don't do such a great job, or where they feel they're being overcharged. Again, with that little Norwood Pro, wow, I just loved sharpening my own blades. I feel I had what were great results. So, number one, the Norwood Pro sharpener wins the contest in my mind versus a sharpening service and all that is entailed with that. And it wins the contest with the BMST 50 for just sheer simplicity, ease of use, and might I add, joy of use. Hey, number two, Woodmizer. I love your mill. I can't say enough positives about your mill. The sharpener, I'd like to be saying something different, but sadly, no. And sadly, unless I see something really earth-shattering in the comments down below, this little guy is going up for sale, and I'm going back to the Norwood Pro sharpener. And again, I'm probably missing something here, but these 8 fingers and 2 thumbs have done enough talking. We're going back to sawmilling, and wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. This is just